Hello and welcome to Business Weekly. I am Umar Kaltungu. Now, coming up on this show today, we are going to x-ray the budgeting process of this administration. That is the debt profile, the capital expenditure, the recurrent expenditure, and of course the debt servicing expenditure, which is as huge as the capital expenditure, about 30.4%. Now, in a bid to meet his administration's target to restore the budget calendar to the January-December fiscal cycle, President Muhammadu Buhari last Tuesday presented the 8.612 trillion naira 2018 appropriation bill to a joint session of the National Assembly, representing a 16% increase over the 7.441 trillion naira budgeted for 2017. Now, of the 8.6 trillion naira budget, the Ministry of Power, Works and Housing, headed by Mr. Babatunde Fashola, got the lion's share of about 555.8 billion naira, signifying the administration's commitment to infrastructure projects to expand the economy and, of course, create more employment opportunities. Now, the budget is tagged Budget of Consolidation. The bill is proposing 2.428 trillion naira as capital expenditure, representing 30.8% of the budget, then 3.494 trillion naira for recurrent expenditure, and of course 2.014 trillion naira for debt servicing. That is the issue, debt servicing. Must we continue to spend so much on debt servicing? Is this healthy for an economy that is just exiting recession? Now, I sat down with Dr. RISLANUDEEN, a Harvard-trained economist and former managing director of Unity Bank, to discuss this in Abuja. You're welcome to this program, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you for having me.
Sir, last Tuesday, President Muhammadu Buhari presented a humongous budget of 8.612 trillion naira to the joint session of the National Assembly. And in this budget, the first thing that popped up of this budget for me was the deficit of 2.01 trillion naira. And secondly, that oil revenue was 2.44 trillion naira expected oil revenue, and then 4.17 trillion naira from non-oil revenue. But my major issue here is that we are already complaining that we are over-borrowed, sort of. And we are still planning to borrow more, and we are already spending in this 2018 budget debt servicing of over 2 trillion naira. How do you think this is going to help the economy in this era that we have just come out of recession by a marginal 0.55%? How can this grow the economy if we are paying so much? If we are paying about a quarter of the total budget for debt servicing?
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you again. First, let me correct the impression of a budget of 8.4 trillion, right? As humongous, it is not. If you compare it apple for apple with the 2017 budget, in nominal term, in real term rather, in nominal term is 16% over and above the previous year's 2017 budget. But in real term, if you index inflation, it's basically the same. But having said that, that's not the key issue. The most important issue is the underlying parameters used, that the MTEF,
yes,
which is even yet to be approved itself. If you notice, it has not yet been approved by the National Assembly. But let us assume that the MTEF is approved. Let us assume that all the underlying assumptions of the budget will scale through. It's worrying about debt to revenue ratio and debt service ratio. Yes, if you look at, economists can always confuse ordinary people. You can always look at borrowing within the context of as a percentage of a budget or debt to GDP ratio, and then by the time you look at all those parameters, you can think that we are within the limit. We don't have any problem. But when you look at the skewed nature of our revenue base, everything tilted towards relying on oil. Even the recession that you are talking about, that we are out, is largely as a result of recovery of oil sector, improvement in output, improvement in price, and zero sabotage from the so-called Niger Delta Avengers. So our export earnings increase, foreign exchange earnings increase. Now our reserve getting up to about $34 billion. So it was clearly not a result. We have to understand this. It is not a result of our hard work. We were lucky that oil sector recovered.
And this luck continues.
It can. We don't have any control. Yes. Now, for example, oil price has gone as high as $62 a barrel 2 days ago, and then it started coming down because of report that there is some recoveries in the oil sector in the United States. It started coming down. So we don't have control. In the Middle East, there are a lot of challenges. There is crisis between Saudi Arabia and Yemen. There is tension between Saudi Arabia and Iran. There is still tension in Syria and Iraq, and as well as Libya. So all those can factor into appreciation in the price of oil. If you're coming down to debt to revenue issue, if you look at 2017 budget, 1.6 trillion was set aside for debt servicing of existing debt. As at that time, existing debt. And that money must have been paid because there was almost 100% performance of the 2017 budget in respect of recurrent. Almost 100%. In capital, it's just about 15%. So that money has been paid. You did a budget of 7.4 trillion, 1.6 trillion has gone into servicing existing debt. This year, 8.4 trillion, 2 trillion will go into servicing of existing debt. And you have about 2.4 trillion out of the entire budget to do capital expenditure. This is a worrying situation because when you look at projected revenue of 4.1 trillion or thereabout, even the president himself acknowledged that there is a problem with performance of the MDAs in terms of returns to revenue. There is a challenge with our debt to tax to GDP ratio, which is very low in the context of Nigerian system. But even for that one, I don't want to get more into more details of that, because when your economy is a recession or you're just getting out of recession, you don't tax people. If you tax people, you just disincentivize recovery. The SMEs, if they are kind of epileptic, they will sink further downwards. Because if it gets to a level where it's no longer bearable, then they will close shop and unemployment will increase, production will go down, there may be cut in supplies, demand will exceed supply and inflation will go up and so on. The whole gimmick about tax without affecting government spending, taxing people without, or rather reducing tax without challenging government spending is based on a theory that was put into practice in the early 80s during Ronald Reagan's time, on a theory that was developed by one American economist called Asolafa. But you have a debt to revenue ratio heading to 50%. You do a budget of 8 trillion and you are spending 2 trillion to service existing debt. Is a worrying situation. First, we need to have a general relook about the economy. Must we rely on government to do everything? The president has already started talking nicely about private sector involvement, getting into a PPP arrangement or on roads construction and so on in exchange for tax credit. That is the way to go. Encourage private investment. This economy is about 100 trillion in terms of GDP size. The budget is just about 8% or 8.4% of our GDP. So Nigerians' life do not center around a budget and its implementation. Look at it. The whole capital expenditure was 15%. And recurrent, the whole recurrent was 100%, paying salaries of civil servants, paying pensioners, paying outstanding contractors, and so on. Nigerian economy is bigger than that size. So if you encourage private investment, the huge infrastructure gap that we have, which if bridged will support growth, will support development, will unlock development in critical sectors, agriculture, value chain, SMEs, mining, and so on, cannot be done by a cycle of a budget. I hope you get me. It cannot be fast. The only way it can be fast-tracked is if you create, a government create a conducive atmosphere for private investment. All this multiple taxation, government will have to look at it. Local government are taxing people, state government are taxing people, federal government are taxing people. You know, it's all just disincentive. Luckily enough, the World Bank report came out on ease of doing business and said Nigerian situation has improved. I hope the improvement, the trajectory will continue. If we continue along that line, and private sector continue to get incentivized to invest, then we don't have to bother ourselves about budget. In some other countries, they only worry about budget looking at projection, underlying projection. What is the projection of inflation? What is GDP? And what is, for big countries, in highly developed countries, what is the defense budget? And so on and so forth. The life of an economy ought not to center around a budget. That's the point I'm making.
Now, we already have an inflationary rate, projected inflationary rate of about 12.4%, even though we are about 16% now. And we're expecting the GDP to grow by about 3.5%. But if something happens to the oil sector, do you think this growth projection of 3.5%?
Well, I will be very honest with you. I don't know the arithmetic that the Ministry of Budget and Planning did to arrive at a projection of 3.5%. Because if you do a medium-term plan, which is the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, which projected that in 2017 we will grow by 2.19%. Maybe the highest we'll get into this year. By the end of this year, by the time we get GDP report for the final year ending, so rather Q3 2017 and then the last quarter of 2017, maybe 1.2, 1.3. We projected 2.19.
Yes.
We have not made 2.19 growth projection. What parameter did they use to think that we can grow by 3.5% next year? I think it's overambitious. And I don't think it's going to be realized. I don't think. I hope it does. It's good for the country. It's good for the economy. But as a professional, I can say the truth. But what I can extrapolate, I do not think we can be able to grow in 2018 at 3.5%. The projection at ERGP was even more than that. It was 4.5.
4.5, yes.
And 7.5 in 2019. As for inflation, largely our inflation minus the food inflation that is still resilient in terms of coming down, the headline inflation, which is the core inflation, has been going down, largely because that aspect of major aspect of inflation is a major aspect of inflation, and that is largely cost push inflation rather than demand pull inflation. Cost push as a result of cost of imported items, because we are import-dependent economy, that we are importing inflation and so on, and because of appreciation in the naira exchange rate, so cost of dollar, cost of imports has gone down. Effectively, cost of doing business has gone down. So inflation rate has been coming down month on month since I think around February, since February or March this year, month on month inflation has been coming down. This is 12.52% is absolutely realistic.
Okay.
Absolutely realistic. But where you also have a problem is on the naira exchange rate. I don't know from where we are shortchanging ourselves. Or rather, the government is shortchanging itself by fixing 305 naira to $1. Because of appreciation on our rate, Naira was about 500, which was not realistic. We always say that 500 Naira was not realistic, 305 Naira was not realistic. A realistic exchange rate is somewhere along the line. And we have found it. Even CBN themselves, they are selling dollars at 333 Naira, 320 Naira to a dollar. Where do they get 300? Who is getting dollar at 305 Naira? I think it could have been more realistic to find an exchange rate that we do not shortchange, because any 1 Naira difference between 305 Naira and 330 Naira that we do a budget, we are shortchanging the federation. Because
so you are saying we should have budgeted maybe 400 Naira to the dollar?
No. I think because of the capacity that CBN had over the last few months, to attack speculation and rent seeking in the foreign exchange market, we are nearing convergence. Because it was up to 520 Naira. 520, yes. Now it's about 360 and it's stuck around that. Yeah. You understand?
For quite some time now it's around.
There is what is called, there is a model that is done which is called REER, R-E-E-R. Realistic Effective Exchange Rate. They do it in central bank, and they know where exactly the official exchange rate ought to be. And if we are there, we will not, because even now we are still having rent seeking.
Yes.
Since there is a divergence between official and the black market, there is the closer the exchange rate is between the black market and the official rate, the better for the economy. Because by so doing, you will have done away with rent seeking, you will have done away with speculative demand, you will have done away with any corrupt tendency associated with such kind of divergence. But the inflation projection is to me, is realistic.
Okay, let's look at this capital expenditure profile of this budget. We're talking about 30 or so percent of capital expenditure. And implementation for 2017 budget so far, we're at the end of the year, it's just about 15% of the 30%. Now, we keep singing the song of diversifying the economy. And from these projections, I can see we said we are heading towards agriculture, and agriculture has one of the smallest budgets in this projection. Do you think this budget can lead us to?
No, like I said earlier on, government should rather support, like the president said, an atmosphere, conducive atmosphere for private investment, for private partnership. That is what will support the economy more than the annual cycle of a budget. Remember that the president himself acknowledged the fact that acknowledge the fact that the 2017 budget performance, as far as the capital expenditure is concerned, has been very low. The few months back, the minister talked about 15%. When he was talking about the underlying imperative importance of capital expenditure as a way of stimulating the economy, he only referred to 2016 budget, which was 50%. More than 50% implemented, 1.2 trillion. So he quoted, and the capital expenditure projection in 2016 was, I think, 1.8 trillion. So the performance was much better. Where they have a problem of implementation, especially on capital aspect of the budget, is, I think, political aspect of it. The need for the executive and the legislature to work together to put the larger interest of the country, especially the members of the National Assembly. The politicking over budget need to stop. Remember that the government effectively has only 2018 before we get into a cycle of an election year. So both the legislature, they are also going for election, and the executive, they are also going back for election. They all have to run faster than their legs. especially now that the budget has been delivered to the National Assembly. Remember, MTEP was already, that's the medium-term economic framework, as well as the fiscal strategy paper, has been with the National Assembly, is yet to be approved. And they cannot approve the budget without approving the MTEP and the fiscal strategy paper, because that is the basis within which the budget is going to be premised. So I think if they can work hard, sort out any gray area that they have among themselves, get this budget ready for implementation by January, it will go a long way in helping the economy, in boosting the other critical sectors. Even, you know, agriculture, you are talking about the budgetary provision of agriculture. What if you invest heavily in power, for example, which has the largest share? If you invest heavily and get results out of power, it will go a long way in impacting on all sectors. Because
but the investments in power have been like a drain pipe since during
the thing is, one day we'll get it right, and we must get it right. Because
do you think the Ministry of Power should be separated from works and housing?
My own personal opinion, in this country, given the critical importance of power, and of power to our growth, to our development, to development of our SMEs, to development of the economy in general, we should have one Minister of Power as well as a Minister of State for Power.
Well, thank you very much, Dr. RISLANUDEEN, for coming on the program today.
Thank you.
We'll talk some more on this Ministry of Power and the politics and the dramas around it.
Thank you.
On our next episode.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Thank you.
That was Dr. RISLANUDEEN Mohammed, a Harvard-trained economist and former managing director of Unity Bank, x-raying the budget and, of course, the huge debt profile. Now, let's move over to the capital market. We'll give you a review of activities on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange throughout last week, what had transpired. You can join me tomorrow on Liberty This Morning in the Business Today segment to look at the close of business today. Now, a turnover of about 1.316 billion shares worth about 13.784 billion naira in 19,169 deals were traded last week on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange by investors, which is in contrast to a total of about 1.363 billion shares valued at about 17.714 billion naira that exchanged hands in the preceding week. The financial services industries, which is measured by volume and by volume, led the activity chart with about 1 billion shares valued at 6.7 billion naira traded in 10,471 deals, which is contributing about 78.3% and 48.4% to the total equity turnover, volume and value respectively. Well, that's the much we can take in this edition of the show, as we now leave you with the graphics of activities, like I said, a review of the activities on the floor of the Nigerian Stock Exchange and, of course, the Forex markets. Very many thanks indeed for watching. Join me next week for more. I am Umar Kaltungo. Good afternoon.